For Eric J on Sports, I'm Eric J, and this is what I think. Perhaps the biggest story of the summer in sports is the underpayment, if you want to call it that, of running backs in the National Football League. Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders and Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants were both refused, if you want to say, contract extensions when their initial contracts with their respective teams ran out. Instead, their respective teams elected to sign Jacobs and Barkley to franchise tag deals. And what a franchise tag deal is, for those who don't know, is a contract for 1 year where the player is paid the average salary of the top 10 players at that position. The top 10 salaries, the top 10 contracts at that position are averaged, and what that average is the franchise tag amount for that position. So that means that the player for 1 year will be among the top 10 players paid at his position, because his contract will be the average of the top 10 salaries at his position. So Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley were offered 1 year deals from their teams, paying them among the top 10 players at their positions in the league. And the franchise tag allows you to continue to negotiate with your player while you have him signed to a 1 year deal. But Jacobs and Barkley disagreed with that prospect. Jacobs and Barkley felt like they should get long-term salaries, and Jacobs and Barkley felt like they should make more money. And here's why. The average salary for quarterbacks, wide receivers, linebackers, safeties, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, every other position in football, the average salary, the franchise tag number, has gone up over the last few years. But for running backs, that number has gone down. And the reason for that is because running backs are being paid less. Austin Ekeler of the Los Angeles Chargers recently spoke on a podcast where he said that his salary now is less than backup wide receivers make on his team. Not the starting guys, the guys that are out there 60 plays a game, but the bench guys, the guys who come in the event of an injury or who come in if they're running a 4 or 5 receiver play. Those guys are making more than running backs, according to Austin Ekeler. There was a stat recently that stated that kickers are making more or as much or just slightly less than running backs. Place kickers who never get hit, who don't even actually touch the ball themselves, unless there's a trick play and the kicker's going to pick the thing up and throw it. They are making as much or more than the running backs. So Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley may have a point, but the nature of professional football in the NFL right now is such that the owners and the coaches feel like it's a passing league. Quarterbacks are throwing for 4,000 yards, and that's the standard. 3,000 yards used to be considered exceptional, and 4,000 yards used to be considered outstanding. Today, if you're not throwing for 4,000 yards and you're not throwing at least 30 touchdowns, you're below average. You're subpar. You're a guy who needs to be replaced in the next player draft if you're not getting 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. Derek Carr with the Raiders come off of 4,000 yard seasons, threw for 3,500 and was immediately cut. So that's the new standard. But if quarterbacks are throwing for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, do you really need a running back? Well, maybe you do. Saquon Barkley, according to the experts and the analysts, is the reason Daniel Jones is doing as well as he is. Because without Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones would be just another guy, and he would stink up the joint. Josh Jacobs led the league in rushing and ran for over 1,600 yards with the Raiders, and they were only 6-11. And that's with Derek Carr throwing for 3,500 yards and with Davante Adams leading the league in receiving yards last year. They still required, even to be as good as they were, Josh Jacobs to rush for 1,600 yards. So maybe the running back is important. But the league isn't saying that running backs don't matter. What the league is saying is that they don't matter as much, particularly in an instance where the age-old belief is that a running back's career is only going to be as lengthy as his first contract. Once he gets ready to sign his second contract, it might be time to get rid of him and get a new one before he gets beat up so much that he cannot continue to perform at the level they thought he would. But then the question becomes, why draft a running back? Saquon Barkley was drafted at the top of his draft. So was Josh Jacobs. So were some of these other guys. But Austin Eckler was an undrafted free agent. But a lot of these guys are getting drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. So if you're drafting running backs this high, then it means that you need them and you want them and you expect that they're going to perform at a high level. And they do. And when they do, you're supposed to pay them, not just use them for 2 or 3 years, get what you could get out of them, and then send them on their way. But the problem that the NFL is facing is not a revolt by running backs, even though that has been discussed. The problem that the NFL is facing is that while they are believing that you can just grab a running back in the 4th round, in the 5th round, or as an undrafted free agent, get one from the USFL or the XFL or from Canada or wherever you're going to get one, the problem that the NFL is facing is that they might actually have to do what they believe that they could do and then see what happens. And here's why. For years, baseball was dominated by American athletes. In particular, African-American American athletes. Guys like Dave Winfield and Kirby Puckett and Reggie Jackson and Rickey Henderson dominated baseball. And if it wasn't those guys, it was guys like Mark McGwire and Ken Griffey Jr. and Jose Canseco, who, though Cuban, is American, and guys like that. They dominated baseball. Barry Bonds, the best players in baseball, Roger Clemens, were American. But then a funny thing happened. While American athletes were choosing baseball over the other sports because of less contact and longer shelf lives with their careers, Rickey Henderson played 25 years in Major League Baseball. While they were choosing baseball because they weren't going to get hurt as much and they were able to work longer, basketball and football created more instantaneous wealth. Guys were being drafted in the NFL after 3 years of college or coming into the NBA either right out of high school or 1 year removed from high school and were instantly millionaires. While in baseball, you had to go through the minor league system and barely make as much as a Walmart employee and then get to the majors and barely make as much as an executive with a major company. And then eventually, second contract, maybe third contract, you become a millionaire. Whereas you're drafted into the NBA at 19 years old, your contract is for $3 to $4 million a year. So the instantaneous wealth in the NBA and the NFL was drawing the best athletes to basketball and football and away from baseball. And the NFL might have the same problem with their running backs. Because if a guy who has speed and a little power and maybe good enough hands to catch the ball where normally he would play running back, what might end up happening is that he might look at the landscape of the NFL and go, hey, if I'm a running back, they're only going to want to keep me for 3 years and they're going to barely pay me as much as a kicker or a second string wide receiver. So why would I want to play this position? And a lot of guys who would be running backs normally might become cornerbacks or safeties or tight ends or middle linebackers or anything else. They might decide to change positions. The shorter, more compact ones might become tight ends or safeties. The taller, more lean, angular ones, like the way Marcus Allen used to be and the way Eric Dickerson used to be, those guys might become tight ends or wide receivers. Some of these guys who were multi-position players, like Marcus Allen, who was a quarterback in high school and then switched to defensive back before becoming a running back, they might decide to stay with those original positions. Stay at quarterback and just be an athletic running quarterback. Or stay as a defensive back and be a cornerback or a safety where they might get to intercept the ball and run with the ball and show off their speed and their hands and their agility and their footwork, as opposed to becoming a running back because they know that as a running back, they're not going to get paid. So if all the good athletes who wouldn't normally be playing running back suddenly become safeties and tight ends and wide receivers, then the good running backs become mediocre running backs because that's all that's left. Guys who weren't good enough to play any other position, but who just had speed and maybe a little bit of power. A guy like Darren McFadden, who was once a Raider and a Cowboy, who was very fast in the open field, but didn't have enough vision to see to cut, so he could only run in a straight line, he was a decent running back, as long as you could blow a hole with the Cowboys' offensive line and get him going in a straight line. But if he had to make a move and cut and change directions, he wasn't very good. But that might be what the NFL ends up having as running backs. Guys who are very fast, with big hands, who aren't going to fumble, but can only run in a straight line. They have no vision, they have no agility, they have no footwork to make cuts and move around, because now those guys are quarterbacks, or those guys are safeties, or cornerbacks, or tight ends, or something else. And then when the NFL realizes that all the good running back athletes are playing other positions and getting paid the way they feel like they should, then the NFL is going to have to go to the fourth rounders, the fifth rounders, the seventh rounders, the undrafted free agents, the XFL guys, the USFL guys, or whatever they can find to get a running back to play with the belief that they don't really need them more than a couple of years anyway. But then finding out that the guys that they're signing aren't even worth the couple of years that they're trying to pay them for. That's the problem that the NFL is facing. Not a revolt. Not a bunch of guys threatening to sit out because they don't make enough, but a bunch of guys realizing that playing running back is a losing proposition financially and deciding not to play running back anymore. That could be the real problem, and the NFL is not ready for a situation like that. Remember to like and share this video and subscribe to this channel and visit the Eric J. on Sports website. And follow me on Facebook at Eric J. on Sports 1 and on Instagram and Twitter at Eric J. on Sports. And for Eric J. on Sports, I'm Eric J. and this is what I think.